Sign it. The billionaire's pen hovers over the contract. Across the table, the venture capitalist smiles like the deal is already done. Crystal glasses gleam. A $3 billion merger waits for a single stroke of ink. Then a plate shatters on the marble floor. Heads turn. A waitress kneels beside the table, trembling, but her eyes are fixed on the contract. Line 42, she whispers. The billionaire frowns. The investors think she's just a clumsy server. What they don't know, the quiet woman cleaning their mess once studied the language hidden inside contracts. And in the next 10 seconds, the poorest person in the room will stop a signature that would steal a man's company and his children. The scent of truffle oil and aged cognac hung heavy in the air of the Obsidian Manhattan's most exclusive dining establishment. It was a place where the lighting was always dim, the velvet banquettes were always plush, and the secrets discussed at the tables were worth more than the building itself. For Louisa Evans, however, it was simply a place where her feet ached and her master's degree in contract law went to die suffocated under the weight of student loans and a sick mother who needed care more than Louisa needed a career. Louisa adjusted the collar of her starch-stiff uniform, smoothing the black apron over her waist. She had learned the art of invisibility long ago. In a place like the Obsidian, the staff were not people. They were mechanisms of delivery. They were expected to manifest with water before a glass was empty and vanish before a conversation became private. Louisa was good at it. She was a ghost with a tray. Table 4 needs a refresh on the vintage Cabernet. Henry. The floor manager hissed as he passed her. Henry was a small man with a thin moustache and a temper that compensated for his lack of stature. And fix your hair, Louisa. A loose strand is a loose standard. Yes, Henry, Louisa murmured, tucking a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. She moved toward table 4, the power table. It was situated in the back corner, secluded by high-backed booze and flanked by sound-dampening acoustic panels disguised as modern art. Tonight it was occupied by two men who radiated wealth, though in very different frequencies. On the left sat Adrian Pierce. Louisa knew him not personally, but from the magazines left behind by customers. He was the wunderkind of the tech world, the architect of Nexus Dynamics. He was handsome in a tired, distracted way, with dark circles bruising the skin beneath his eyes, and a tie that had been loosened hours ago. He looked like a man who had been running a marathon for 10 years and had forgotten where the finish line was. Opposite him sat Gavin Mercer. If Adrian was the exhausted runner, Gavin was the spectator betting against him. Gavin was older, with silver hair coiffed into an immobile helmet and a suit that cost more than Louisa's childhood home. He smiled too much. It was a reptilian smile, all teeth, and no warmth, the kind of expression a shark might wear if it learned how to conduct a hostile takeover. Louisa approached with the bottle of 2005 Cabernet, her movements fluid and silent. "It's a standard restructuring." Adrian Gavin was saying, his voice smooth, like oil slicking over rough pavement. "We take the burden of the logistics division off your hands. You get the capital injection you need to launch the AI project. The board gets off your back. Everyone wins." Adrian rubbed his temples. His eyes closed. "I don't know, Gavin. The logistics division is where my father started the company. It's the backbone. If I cut it loose, if you don't cut it loose, the whole body dies." Gavin interrupted, leaning forward. He poured the urgency into his voice like concrete. "Look, I've had my legal team look this over 3 times. It's a clean excision. You keep the IP. You keep the branding. You keep the headquarters. We just take the heavy lifting. You want to be an innovator, Adrian, not a truck driver. Let us drive the trucks." Louisa poured the wine into Gavin's glass. He didn't acknowledge her. To him, she was just a floating hand dispensing alcohol. "The board meeting is on Friday." Adrian said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "If I don't have a solvency plan by then, they'll vote you out." Gavin finished for him. "And they'll be right to do it. You're drowning, Adrian. I'm just throwing you a life raft." "But the raft leaves port tonight. My investors are getting twitchy. If we don't sign this LOI letter of intent tonight, the capital disappears." Louisa moved to Adrian's side. As she poured the dark red liquid, her eyes drifted to the document spread across the table. It was thick, bound in a heavy blue folder, but opened to page 12. The text was dense singles, spaced and justified. To the untrained eye, it was a wall of gibberish. But Louisa's eyes weren't untrained. Before the medical bills piled up before she had to drop out of her third year at Columbia Law to wait tables, she had been at the top of her class in corporate litigation. She read legalese like a second language. As the wine gurgled softly into the crystal, her gaze snagged on a paragraph halfway down the page. Subsection 4. B asset liquidation and subsidiary rights. It seemed standard, but then she saw the cross-reference code. See Schedule C Item 14. Most people wouldn't look at the schedule. Most people trusted the summary. But Louisa's eyes darted to the edge of the paper where the schedule was partially visible under Adrian's cuff. Item 14. The Pierce Family Trust and all associated guardianship mandates regarding custodial rights of biological heirs. Louisa's hand froze. The bottle hovered. This wasn't a business merger. This was an assassination of rights. Hey! Gavin snapped his hand, slamming onto the table. Watch it. Louisa jolted. A single drop of red wine had dripped from the bottle's lip and landed not on the paper, but on the pristine white tablecloth, a millimeter from Gavin's cuff. I'm so sorry, sir, Louisa said, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled a cloth from her apron, dabbing at the spot instantly. Clumsy, Gavin sneered, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. Adrian, this is what I'm talking about. Inefficiency. It's everywhere. You tolerate it in your company and look where it's got you. You need to trim the fat. Adrian opened his eyes and looked at Louisa. For a moment he actually saw her. He saw the panic in her eyes, the exhaustion etched into the corners of her mouth. He offered a weak, apologetic smile. It's fine, Adrian said softly. It's just a drop of wine, Gavin. Let's not fire the staff over a laundry bill. It's the principal, Gavin grumbled, taking a sip of the wine Louisa had just poured. Now, pick up the pen, Adrian. Let's get this done so we can celebrate. Louisa stepped back into the shadows, her tray clutched to her chest like a shield. Her breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. She knew what she had seen. She knew exactly what Gavin Mercer was doing. He wasn't just buying the logistics division. He was triggering a clause that would classify Adrian's primary assets, including his personal trust, as collateral for the restructuring debt. And hidden inside that trust were the custodial provisions for his children. If Adrian defaulted on the restructuring, which based on the aggressive debt leveraging she saw in paragraph 2, he was guaranteed to do within 6 months, Gavin wouldn't just take the company. He would legally seize control of the assets required to support Adrian's children, effectively bankrupting him personally and rendering him unfit for custody in the eyes of the family court. It was a trap. A cruel, complex, irrevocable trap designed to destroy a man completely. Louisa looked around. The restaurant was busy. Henri was watching her from the Waitress station. His eyes narrowed silently, warning her to get back to work. She needed this job. She needed the tips. Her mother's medication cost $800 a month, and rent was due in 3 days. If she spoke up, she would be fired. She would be blacklisted. Who would believe a waitress over a billionaire venture capitalist? She turned to walk away. She took 2 steps toward the kitchen. Then she heard the scratching sound. It was the sound of a pen testing the paper. Scratch, scratch. Adrian was preparing to sign. Louisa stopped. She thought of her father, a good man who had been ruined by a bad contract, a man who died believing he was a failure because he didn't read the fine print. She remembered the promise she made to herself when she entered law school. I will not let the bullies win. She turned around. The tray in her hands felt heavy, but her conscience felt heavier. The atmosphere at table 4 had shifted from negotiation to execution. Gavin Mercer leaned back in the ox-blood leather booth, his posture relaxed, almost languid. He watched Adrian Pierce with the predatory patience of a wolf waiting for a wounded deer to finally collapse. You're making the right choice, Gavin said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming soothing, almost hypnotic. Think about the freedom, Adrian. No more late nights agonizing over supply chains. No more unions breathing down your neck. You get to go back to being the visionary, the genius. Adrian stared at the document. The pen felt like a lead weight in his hand. He was a brilliant engineer, a man who could visualize complex code structures and mechanical systems in his sleep, but legal text. It was a fog. It was designed to be opaque. He had fired his general counsel 2 weeks ago in a fit of paranoia. Paranoia that Gavin had subtly fueled over months of friendly lunches. They're leaking to the press, Adrian Gavin had whispered. You can't trust anyone inside. So here he was, alone, staring at a document that would decide the fate of his grandfather's legacy. The timeline, Adrian murmured, tapping the paper. 6 months to turn a profit on the restructured debt. It seems aggressive, Gavin, clears throat, even for you. Gavin waved a hand dismissively. Standard metrics, Adrian. We motivate the new management team with tight deadlines. It creates diamonds. Pressure creates wood diamonds. Besides, I have a side letter drafted that gives you a grace period. It's in the appendix. I didn't see an appendix, Adrian said, frowning. It's electronic. Gavin lied smoothly, not missing a beat. Sent it to your private server 10 minutes ago. Trust me, Adrian. We've been friends for years. Do you really think I'd let you sink? Adrian looked at Gavin. He wanted to believe him. He was so tired of fighting. His wife had left him a year ago, taking the dog, but leaving the twins Leo and Sophie. The company was hemorrhaging cash. He just wanted it to stop. He wanted to sleep. Okay. Adrian exhaled, the fight draining out of him. Okay, let's do it. He lowered the pen to the signature line. The black ink began to bead at the tip of the nib. 10 feet away, Louisa Evans was moving. She wasn't walking. She was marching. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She ignored Henri, who was frantically signaling for her to attend to table 7. She ignored the couple at table 2, waving for the check. As she approached the table, her mind raced through the statutes she had memorized. Fraud in the inducement unconscionable contracts, hidden clauses. But legal arguments wouldn't work here. She didn't have time to litigate. She had seconds to disrupt. She needed to break the trance. She reached the table just as the pen touched the paper. More water, gentlemen. Her voice was too loud. It cracked slightly. Adrian jumped the pen, skidding across the paper, leaving a jagged black scar near the signature line, but not on it. Gavin's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with sudden, terrifying fury. We didn't ask for water, he hissed. Get away from this table now. Louisa didn't move. She stood firmly between the two men, clutching the crystal picture of ice water like a weapon. I noticed your glasses were low, she said, her hands shaking as she reached for Adrian's glass. I'm fine, Adrian said, looking at her with confusion. Please, miss, we are in the middle of something important. It's very important, Louisa said, staring directly at Adrian. Her eyes were wide, desperate. Very important to read everything, especially the things that don't look like they belong. Gavin stood up. He was tall, imposing. He loomed over Louisa, blocking her view of Adrian. I am going to have you fired. He growled, his voice low enough that the surrounding tables couldn't hear, but venomous enough to make Louisa flinch. I'm going to have you thrown out on the street. Leave now. Sir, I'm just doing my job, Louisa said, dodging his gaze to look at Adrian again. She needed to signal him. She couldn't just scream, he's stealing your kids. Gavin would sue her for slander, and without proof, she'd be destroyed. She needed Adrian to look. She reached out to pour the water into Adrian's glass, but her focus was entirely on the document. She saw the paragraph again. Line 42. Adrian Gavin said, sitting back down but keeping his glare fixed on Louisa. Sign the papers. I'll deal with the management. This service is appalling. Adrian hesitated. The interruption had broken his rhythm. The jagged line on the paper bothered him. It looked like a fracture. The pen Adrian, Gavin commanded. Louisa knew she had one chance. She couldn't be subtle anymore. Subtlety was what Gavin was using to slit Adrian's throat. She feigned a stumble. It wasn't hard. Her knees were already weak with terror. She pitched forward the heavy crystal pitcher, tipping in her hand. But she didn't spill it on Gavin. That would be assault. And she didn't spill it on the document. That would be destruction of property. She spilled it directly onto the floor right next to the table, creating a massive splashing hazard. And in the chaos of the movement, she dropped the heavy silver serving spoon she'd been holding in her other hand. Clang! The noise was deafening in the hushed restaurant. It rang out like a gunshot. Every head in the dining room turned. The silence that followed was absolute. "Oh my God!" Louisa gasped, dropping to her knees immediately. "I am so clumsy. I am so sorry. Get her out of here." Gavin roared, losing his composure completely. "Manager? Where is the manager?" Henry came running, his face purple with rage. "Louisa, what have you done? You are finished. Get out." Louisa was on the floor, grabbing napkins, wiping frantically near Adrian's shoes, but she wasn't looking at the floor. As Adrian looked down at her, baffled by the sudden chaos, she looked up at him. Their faces were inches apart. "Line 42, she whispered. It was barely a breath. "The pierced trust. Schedule C. He takes the children." Adrian froze. The world seemed to stop spinning. The noise of Henry yelling, Gavin shouting for security, the murmur of the other diners. It all faded into a dull roar. "He takes the children." The words hit Adrian harder than a physical blow. "What did you say?" Adrian whispered back, his voice trembling. "Get up!" Henry grabbed Louisa by the arm, hauling her to her feet. "I am so sorry, Monsieur Pierce, Monsieur Mayor. She is leaving immediately. Don't worry, the bill is on the house." "Get your hands off her," Adrian said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had the cold, hard weight of absolute authority. Henry froze his hand, still gripping Louisa's arm. "Mia," I said. Adrian stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving Louisa's face. "Get your hands off her." Henry released her instantly, stepping back as if burned. Gavin looked nervous. The sweat on his upper lip was visible under the chandelier light. "Adrian, don't let this hysteria distract you. She's obviously unstable. Look at her. Let's just sign and go to a quieter place." Adrian ignored him. He looked at Louisa. She was shaking her uniform stained with water, her hair messy, but her eyes were clear. They were the eyes of someone telling the truth. "Line 42, Adrian asked. Louisa nodded. "And Schedule C?" Adrian sat down. He didn't pick up the pen. He picked up the contract. "Adrian, really?" Gavin laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "You're going to take legal advice from a waitress. This is absurd. I have a jet waiting. We are on a schedule." "The jet can wait," Adrian said coldly. He flipped the pages. 1, 2, 3. He found page 12. He counted down the lines. Subsection 4B. He read it. C. Schedule C, item 14. He flipped to the back of the document. There was no Schedule C attached. "Gavin?" Adrian said, his voice eerily calm. "Where is Schedule C?" It's in the digital file," Gavin stammered. "It's standard boilerplate." Adrian, just definitions. Leah, Adrian said, not looking up. "You said Schedule C. What is it?" Louisa took a deep breath. She stood tall, ignoring Henry's glare, ignoring the security guard walking toward them. Schedule C defines distressed assets to include any personal holding trusts if the primary entity fails to meet EBITDA targets within 60 days. Louisa recited her memory, unlocking the legal text she had glimpsed. Item 14 specifically names the Pierce Family Trust as a collateral asset. If you sign this and the company doesn't make a 20% profit in 2 months, which is mathematically impossible given the debt load, in Article 2, Gavin Mercer automatically becomes the trustee of your family estate. That includes your home, your grandmother's bonds, and the custodial funds for Leo and Sophie. Adrian went pale. He looked at Gavin. Is that true? Gavin's face contorted. The charming mask fell away, revealing the rot underneath. It's a security clause, Adrian. You're a high risk. I needed insurance. It doesn't mean I'd actually take your kids. But you'd have the legal right to Adrian, said his voice rising. You'd control their money. You'd control their home. You could evict us. It's business, Gavin shouted, standing up. It's just business. You're too emotional. That's your problem. That's why you're failing. Adrian stood up slowly. He picked up the heavy crystal glass of wine the one Louisa had poured. He looked at the contract. He looked at Gavin. You tried to steal my children, Adrian said softly. Then, with a calm, deliberate motion, Adrian tossed the wine into Gavin's face. It wasn't an accident this time. The dark red liquid splashed over Gavin's expensive silver hair, down his Italian suit, soaking the white shirt pink. Gavin sputtered, blinded, gasping for air. You maniac! I'll sue you. I'll ruin you. Get out, Adrian said. Before I kill you. Gavin wiped his eyes, looking around. The entire restaurant was staring. He realized with a sinking heart that he had lost. He grabbed his briefcase, dripping wine onto the floor, and stormed out, knocking a chair over as he went. The silence returned to the obsidian. Adrian stood there for a moment, his chest heaving. Then he turned to Louisa. She was hugging herself, looking terrified. She expected to be fired. She expected to be arrested. What is your name? Adrian asked. Louisa, she whispered. Louisa Evans. Louisa Evans, Adrian repeated. He looked at the shattered plate on the floor, the spilled water, the mess. Then he looked at the contract on the table. He picked it up and ripped it in half. Henry Adrian called out. The manager skewered forward, looking terrified. Yes, Muir Pierce, I assure you, she is fired immediately. She will never work in this city, Egum, if you fire her. Adrian interrupted, his voice like steel. I will buy this building and evict you. Henry's mouth snapped shut. In fact, Adrian continued, bring us a fresh bottle of your best champagne and a third glass. A third glass, monsieur? Yes, Adrian said, pulling out the chair opposite him, the chair Gavin had sat in. He looked at Louisa. Please sit down, Louisa. I think I need a new lawyer, and it seems you're the only one in the room who knows how to read. The champagne bubbles fizzed in the flute, a stark contrast to the heavy silence that had settled over the rest of the restaurant. The other diners had gone back to their meals, though eyes still darted towards table 4 every few seconds. Louisa sat on the edge of the leather booth, her posture rigid. She felt like an imposter. 10 minutes ago, she was worrying about making rent. Now she was sipping Dom Perrin across from a man whose net worth was higher than the GDP of a small country. You mentioned Schedule C, Adrian said, breaking the silence. He wasn't drinking. He was studying her face with an intensity that made her flush. You didn't just guess. You knew exactly what that term meant. Distressed assets, EBITDA targets. You aren't just a waitress, are you? Louisa lowered her glass. I was a 3L at Columbia Law, she admitted quietly. Top 5% of my class. I was editor of the Law Review. Adrian's eyebrows raised slightly. Was life happens? Louisa said, her voice tightening. She didn't want his pity. My mother was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's 2 years ago. The care facilities. Well, they don't accept potential law degrees as payment. I had to drop out to work full time. Days at a coffee shop nights here. It pays the bills. Adrian looked at her hands. They were red from scrubbing tables, the nails short and unpolished. But he remembered the way she had stood up to Gavin. He remembered the clarity in her voice when she cited the contract. My company Nexus Dynamics is dying. Clear his throat. Adrian said bluntly. Louisa blinked, surprised by his honesty. But the news, the tech blogs say you're just pivoting. The blogs are wrong. I'm bleeding out. Adrian admitted, rubbing his face with his hands. I'm an engineer, Louisa. I build things. I dream in code and schematics. But this corporate warfare, the sharks like Gavin, I don't know how to fight them. Clear his throat. I hired big firms, white shoe lawyers from Scatterin and Lamb, but they just bill me by the hour and tell me to settle. They don't care if I lose. They get paid either way. He looked her in the eye. You cared. He said, you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. You risked your job to save my children from a man you didn't even know. That is worth more to me than a Harvard degree. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy cardstock business card. He didn't hand it to her. He flipped it over and wrote a number on the back. I need a personal legal consultant, he said. Someone who answers to me, not a board of partners. Someone who can read the fine print and tell me where the traps are. Louisa laughed a dry, humoral sound. Mr. Pierce, I haven't even passed the bar exam. I can't practice law. I don't need you to file motions in court. I have an army of suits for that, Adrian said intensely. I need a strategist. I need a glowing red warning light. I need you to be what you were tonight, my eyes. He slid the card across the table. I'll pay off your student loans, he said calmly. I'll cover your mother's medical care at the Cedar-Sinai facility, the best one, and I'll pay you a salary of $200,000 a year. Louisa stared at the card. The numbers swirled in her head. It was a lifeline. It was a miracle. Why? She whispered. Because you saw the trap? Adrian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. And because I have a feeling Gavin Mercer isn't the only wolf in my henhouse. If he had that inside information about the trust, someone close to me gave it to him. Clear's throat. Louisa looked up, her legal mind already engaging. You have a leak, a mole, exactly, Adrian said, and I need an outsider to find them. Will you help me? Louisa looked at Ree, who was glaring at her from the kitchen door. She looked at the heavy apron around her waist. Then she looked at the man who was fighting for his children. She picked up the card. When do I start? Tomorrow morning, Adrian said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. 7 a.m., 42nd floor. Dress for war. The headquarters of Nexus Dynamics was a monolith of glass and steel piercing the Manhattan skyline. The lobby was a cathedral of minimalism, all white marble and floating staircases. Louisa arrived at 6:50 a.m. She wasn't wearing her waitress uniform. She was wearing her court suit, a charcoal grey blazer and skirt she had bought for interviews she never got to attend, saved in the back of her closet in plastic wrap. It was a little tight and the style was 3 years old, but she wore it like armor. Security let her up immediately. Her name was already in the system. As the elevator rocketed toward the 42nd floor, Louisa's stomach did flip-flops. She reviewed the files Adrian had sent her overnight. The situation was grim. Nexus was cash poor. The AI Project Ether was brilliant but expensive. The board of directors was voting in 4 days on a motion of no confidence against Adrian. If he lost the vote, he lost the company. If he lost the company, the distressed assets clauses in his personal loans would trigger, and he would lose the kids. The elevator doors slid open. The executive floor was a hive of activity. Even at this hour, men and women in expensive suits power-walked with tablets shouting into headsets. You must be the waitress. The voice was cold, sharp, and dripping with disdain. Louisa turned. Standing by the reception desk was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of ice. She was tall, blonde, and wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than Louisa's entire education. I'm Louisa Evans, Louisa said, extending a hand. The woman didn't take it. I'm Elena Vance, Chief Financial Officer. Adrian told me he hired a consultant. I didn't realize he was recruiting from the catering staff, Elena Vance. Louisa's mind clicked. She had seen the name in the financials. Elena had been with Nexus for 5 years. She was the one who signed off on the debt restructuring that Gavin had almost used to strangle Adrian. Clear's throat. I have a background in contract law, Ms. Vance, Louisa said, coolly dropping her hand. And I have a knack for spotting bad deals. Elena's eyes narrowed for a split second, and the mask of corporate boredom slipped, revealing something sharper. Fear, anger. We have a legal department, Miss Evans. We don't need help. Adrian is manic. He makes impulsive decisions like hiring you. Don't get comfortable. You'll be gone by Friday. We'll see. Louisa said, Louisa. Adrian's voice boomed down the hallway. He was standing in the doorway of his corner office, looking more energized than he had the night before. Get in here. We have work to do." Louisa walked past Elena, feeling the CFO's gaze burning into her back like a laser. Inside the office, the view was breathtaking, but the room was a disaster zone. Whiteboards were covered in equations. Boxes of files were overturned. "Ignore the mess," Adrienne said, clearing a chair. "I've been looking for the leak all night." "It's Elena," Louisa said, sitting down. Adrienne paused, holding a cup of coffee. "Elena, she's been with me since the IPO. She's the godmother to my son, Leo. She's the CFO," Louisa reasoned, pulling a file from her bag. "She's the only one besides you who had access to the full text of the trust documents." And Louisa opened the folder. "I did some digging into public records last night. Elena's brother, Marcus Vance, sits on the board of Mercer Capital." Adrienne went still. Mercer Capital, Gavin's firm. She didn't disclose the conflict of interest Louisa asked. "No," Adrienne whispered. The betrayal washed over his face, making him look 10 years older. "She told me her brother was in real estate in Florida." "She's feeding him," Louisa said firmly. "She structured the debt to be complicated so you wouldn't read it. She pushed for the merger. She's the one opening the gates for the wolves." Adrian slammed his hand on the desk. "I'll fire her right now." "No." Louisa stood up. "If you fire her now, she'll destroy the evidence. She'll claim wrongful termination and sue you, freezing the company's assets right before the board vote. You'll lose everything." "So what do we do?" Adrian asked, his hands shaking with rage. Louisa walked to the window, looking out at the city. She felt a strange calm settling over her. This was the game. This was the chess match she was born to play. "We don't fire her," Louisa said, turning back with a cold smile. "We feed her." "Feed her. We give her false information," Louisa explained. "We make her think you found a new investor, a white knight savior who is going to pay off the debt and save the company. We make the fake deal look so good that Gavin panics. And then, Louisa said, when Gavin tries to block the fake deal with illegal tactics, we catch him, and we catch Ella Lanena helping him." Adrian looked at her. A slow grin spread across his face. "You really are dangerous, aren't you?" "I served tables for 6 years, Adrian," Louisa said. "I know how to handle people who think they own the place. Now, we need a fake investor." "Do you know anyone?" Adrienne thought for a moment. "There's an old friend from college, Tobias. He runs a sovereign wealth fund in Singapore. He owes me a favor. He won't actually invest, but he might lend us his name for 48 hours. "Get him on the phone," Louisa commanded. "I'll draft the fake term sheet. We're going to leave it on the printer where Elena will accidentally find it." The plan was set in motion at noon. Louisa accidentally left a document labeled Confidential Project Titan Funding in the breakroom copier. Within 10 minutes, security cameras showed Elena Vance entering the room, glancing around and sliding the papers into her briefcase. By 2:00 p.m., the trap began to work. Adrian's phone rang. It was Gavin. "Adrian." Gavin's voice was tight-strained. "I heard a rumor you're talking to the Singaporeans." "Word travels fast," Adrian said, leaning back in his chair, putting the call on speaker so Louisa could hear. "They're sharks, Adrian." "Worse than me," Gavin said. "Look, I can sweeten the deal. I'll remove the custody clause. I'll give you an extra 6 months." "I don't think so, Gavin," Adrian said. "Titan is offering a full buyout of the debt. No strings attached." "You're making a mistake," Gavin shouted. "I'll see you at the board meeting on Friday. You won't survive this." The line went dead. "He's panicked," Louisa said, pumping her fist. "He knows if you get external funding, his hostile takeover fails." "So far, so good," Adrian said. "But we still need to prove Elena is the leak. We need hard evidence." "We will," Louisa said. "Tonight I set up a digital tripwire on the server. If anyone tries to email the Titan term sheet to an external address, it logs the keystrokes and takes a screenshot." They waited. The hours ticked by. The sun set, turning the sky over Manhattan a bruised purple. They ordered takeout Chinese food eaten out of cartons on the mahogany desk. For the first time in years, Adriana laughed. He told Louisa about his kids, about how Leo loved dinosaurs and Sophie wanted to be an astronaut. Louisa told him about her mom, how she used to sing jazz in the clubs downtown, before the sickness took her memories. It was a moment of peace in the eye of the storm. But the storm was closer than they thought. At 9:00 p.m., the office door flew open. It wasn't Elena. It was the police. 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a cheap suit walked in. Behind them, looking smug, was Elena Vance. "Adrian Pierce?" the detective asked. "Yes?" Adrian stood up, confused. "I'm Detective Miller. We have a warrant for the arrest of your employee, Louisa Evans." Louisa froze. On what charges? Elena stepped forward holding a folder. Her face was a mask of faux concern. "I'm so sorry, Adrian. I tried to tell you. I ran a background check on her. Did you know she was expelled from Columbia for plagiarism and theft?" "That's a lie," Louisa gasped. "I dropped out for financial reasons." And Elena continued. "We found this in her purse in the cloakroom." She held up a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a flash drive. That drive contains the proprietary source code for Project Ether. Elena said security logs show it was downloaded from your terminal. Adrian using Ms. Evans' access card about an hour ago. "I didn't do that," Louisa shouted, looking at Adrian. "I was with you the whole time." "You went to the bathroom at 800. Adrian said, his voice wavering. He looked at the flash drive. That code was worth billions. It was his life's work. "Adrian, please," Louisa pleaded. She planted it. "It's a setup. She's trying to get rid of me. Because I know about Gavin." "Save it for the judge," Detective Miller said, pulling out handcuffs. He walked over to Louisa, spinning her around. The cold metal clicked onto her wrists. Adrian Louisa cried out as they began to march her out. "Don't trust her. Check the server logs. Check the tripwire." "The server logs have been wiped," Elena said smoothly. "Whatever she did, she covered her tracks." "I'm sorry, Adrian. I told you she was a grifter." Adrian stood paralyzed. He looked at Louisa being dragged away, tears streaming down her face. Then he looked at Elena, who was watching him with the steady, unblinking gaze of a predator. Doubt. It was a terrible thing. Louisa had appeared out of nowhere. She was desperate for money. The story about the sick mother. Was it true, or was it the perfect cover for a corporate spy sent by a rival to steal his code? "Wait," Adrian said. The detective stopped at the door. "Where are you taking her? Central booking," Miller said. "Grand larceny and corporate espionage. She won't be making bail anytime soon." They dragged her out. The heavy oak doors slammed shut. Adrian was alone with Elena. "I know it hurts," Elena said, walking over and placing a hand on his shoulder. "But I saved you, Adrian. I saved the company." Adrian looked at her hand. He remembered Louisa's words. She's the one opening the gates for the wolves. He pulled away from Elena's touch. "Leave me," he said. "Adrian, we need to prepare for the board meeting." "Get out!" he roared, throwing a stapler at the wall. It shattered much like the plate in the restaurant the night before. Elena flinched, then nodded. "Get some rest. I'll handle things until Friday." She left. Adrian sank into his chair. He felt sick. He felt like he had just let the only honest person in his life be thrown to the wolves. He looked at his computer. The server logs were indeed wiped. It looked like Louisa was guilty. But then his phone buzzed. A text message. It wasn't from Louisa. It wasn't from Gavin. It was from an unknown number. He opened it. It was a video file. Adrian clicked play. The video was grainy. It was taken from a low angle. Maybe a hidden camera. No, it was a phone camera propped up on a shelf. The video showed the Nexus break room. It showed Louisa placing the trap document on the printer. Then it showed her leaving. 10 minutes later, the video showed Elena entering. She took the document, but then she did something else. She took a flash drive out of her pocket, the same silver flash drive the police had just found in Louisa's bag. She plugged it into the break room computer, which was connected to the main network. She typed furiously for 2 minutes. Then she pulled the drive out, walked over to the cloakroom where the employee coats were hanging, and slipped the drive into Louisa's purse. The video ended. Below the video was a text sent from Henry Manager of the Obsidian. Message. She came back this morning to pick up her last check. She asked me to hide her phone in your break room and keep it recording. She said, "If I get arrested, send this to Adrian. She is a smart girl, Mr. Pierce. Do not let her rot in jail." Adrian stared at the screen. His hands were trembling, but not from fear this time. Clear his throat. From rage. Pure, cold, righteous rage. Louisa had anticipated the frame-up. She had outplayed them all. Adrian stood up. He grabbed his coat. He wasn't going home. He was going to the police station. And then he was going to burn Gavin Mercer and Ella Lenana Vance to the ground. The holding cell at the 19th precinct was a cage of cold concrete and despair. The air smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Louisa sat on the metal bench, her knees pulled to her chest, shivering in her thin court suit. It had been 6 hours since she was booked. 6 hours of knowing that her life was effectively over. A felony charge meant she would never pass the bar. She would never work in a law firm. The dream she had fought for, the dream her father died believing in, was ash. And the worst part wasn't the career. It was the betrayal. For a few shining hours, she had believed Adrian Pierce was different. She had believed he saw her. But when the pressure mounted, he had looked at her with the same suspicion as everyone else. The heavy steel door buzzed and clanked open. "Evans," the guard grunted. "You made bail, and the charges are dropped." Louisa looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "What, you heard me? You're free to go. Lawyers waiting out front." Louisa stood on shaky legs. She walked down the long fluorescent-lit corridor, stepping out into the precinct lobby. Adrian was there. He wasn't wearing the disheveled look of the tortured genius anymore. He was wearing a navy suit that fit like armor, a crisp white shirt, and an expression of grim determination. Beside him stood a man in a trench coat, a high-powered criminal defense attorney Louisa recognized from the news. "Louisa," Adrian said, stepping forward. Louisa recoiled, taking a step back. "Stay away from me. You let them take me." "I know," Adrian said, his voice raw with regret, "and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. But right now, I need you to look at this." He held out his phone. He played the video Henry had sent. Louisa watched it, her breath hitching. She saw herself hide the phone. She saw Elena plant the drive. "You knew," Adrian said softly. "You knew she would try something, so you set a trap inside the trap." "I didn't know if you'd ever see it," Louisa whispered. I thought you trusted her more than me." "I did," Adrian admitted. "And that was the biggest mistake of my life. But I see the truth now. The district attorney has seen this video. The charges against you are expugned. Elena, however, is going to have a very bad day." He extended his hand. "The board meeting is in 2 hours, Louisa. They are voting to remove me. Gavin is going to trigger the custody clause by noon. I can't do this alone. I need my legal counsel." Louisa looked at his hand. She saw the sincerity in his eyes. She saw the fire. She realized that he hadn't come here just to apologize. He had come here to pick up his partner for the final battle. She took his hand. "Let's go take them down." The boardroom of Nexus Dynamics was a soundproof chamber of judgment. 12 board members sat around the oval table made of black walnut. At the head of the table sat the chairman, a stern man named Arthur Sterling. No, wait. Arthur Banks, avoiding forbidden names. On the right side sat Gavin Mercer, looking like the king of the world. He was chatting amiably with Helena Vance, who looked cool, collected, and victorious. "It's a tragedy, really," Gavin was saying loudly enough for the room to hear. Adrian just cracked under the pressure. Corporate espionage, stealing his own code to sell on the black market. It's a cry for help. We did everything we could. Elena sighed, shaking her head. "But the financials don't lie. He's unfit to lead. Shall we call the vote?" Arthur Banks asked, checking his watch. Adrian is not here. I assume he is too ashamed to show his face. I move to vote immediately, Gavin said, raising his hand. To remove Adrian Pierce as CEO and appoint Mercer Capital as the interim managing partner. Seconded, Elena said. All in favour, Banks asked. Hands began to rise. 1, 2, 3. Bam! The double doors of the boardroom swung open with enough force to rattle the windows. Adrian Pierce strode in. He wasn't alone. Walking beside him, head held high, was Louisa Evans. She hadn't changed clothes. Her suit was wrinkled. Her hair was tied back in a severe bun, but she looked more powerful than anyone in the room. I object to the motion, Adrian announced, his voice booming. Adrian, Gavin sneered, though his smile faltered slightly. And the waitress, really? This is a board meeting, not a diner. Security! Sit down, Gavin, Adrian commanded. He didn't shout, but the authority in his tone made Gavin pause. Adrian walked to the head of the table. Louisa moved to the projector controls, plugging in her laptop with the speed of a seasoned tech expert. You are voting on a lie. Adrian addressed the board. You have been told that the company is failing. You have been told that I am unstable. And you have been told that Mercer Capital is the only solution. The numbers don't lie, Adrian Arthur Banks said impatiently. Elena showed us the Q3 reports. We are insolvent. Elena showed you the reports. She doctored. Louisa spoke up. Her voice was clear, ringing like a bell in the silence. Elena stood up, her face flushing pink. How dare you? You're a criminal. You should be in jail. Actually, Louisa said, hitting a key on the laptop, I'm the only person in this room who isn't a criminal. The projector screen flared to life. It wasn't a spreadsheet, it was a video. The video of the break room. The board members watched in stunned silence as Elena Vance, their trusted CFO, planted evidence on an employee. This, Louisa narrated, is your CFO, framing me to cover up the fact that she has been leaking proprietary data to Gavin Mercer for 6 months. Louisa clicked the next slide. It was a complex web of bank transfers. I spent the car ride over here tracing the shell companies, Louisa explained. Elena's brother sits on Gavin's board, but more importantly, Gavin has been paying Elena consulting fees through an offshore account in the Caymans. Here are the routing numbers. The room erupted in murmurs. Elena sank into her chair, her face draining of colour. This is preposterous. Gavin stood up, slamming his fist on the table. Fake news doctored footage. I'll sue you for defamation. Sit down, Gavin, Adrian said, stepping closer to him. We're not done. Louisa clicked the final slide. It was the contract, the one from the restaurant. This is the debt restructuring agreement Gavin tried to force Adrian to sign, Louisa said. Note clause 42, the targeted seizure of the Pierce family trust. Gavin wasn't trying to save the company. He was trying to bankrupt Adrian personally to seize custody of his children as leverage for a total asset strip. Arthur Banks, the chairman, looked at the screen. He looked at Gavin. His face went purple. Is this true? Gavin, clears throat. Banks asked, his voice low and dangerous. Adrian turned to the door. Officers, Adrian turned to the door. Officers, the same detective who had arrested Louisa the night before, walked in, but this time he wasn't looking at her. Elena Vance, Detective Miller said, pulling out the handcuffs. You are under arrest for corporate sabotage, evidence tampering, and filing a false police report. Elena screamed as they hauled her up. Gavin told me to do it. He promised me a seat on the board. It was his idea. And Gavin Mercer, the detective, continued, turning to the billionaire. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding insider trading and conspiracy to commit fraud. Gavin didn't scream. He tried to run. He bolted for the side door, but Adrian was faster. He stepped in Gavin's path, not touching him, just blocking the way. Gavin collided with Adrian's chest and bounced back. Checkmate, Adrian whispered. The officers grabbed Gavin, dragging him out of the room, kicking and screaming about his lawyers, his money, and how he would destroy them all. When the doors finally closed, the silence in the room was absolute. Arthur Banks stood up. He looked at Adrian. He looked at Louisa. Adrian. Banks said, clearing his throat. It seems, it seems the board has been misled. The motion to remove you is withdrawn immediately. Thank you, Arthur, Adrian said calmly. But there will be changes starting with the CFO position, agreed, Banks said. We will begin the search for a replacement immediately. No need, Adrian said. He turned to Louisa. Louisa Evans is the new Chief Legal Officer and interim CFO of Nexus Dynamics. The board members looked at Louisa, the woman in the wrinkled suit, the woman who had been a waitress 24 hours ago. She has a law degree, one member asked. She has something better, Adrian said, smiling at her. She has integrity, and she reads the fine print. 3 months later, the restaurant was the Obsidian, but this time Louisa wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a tailored black dress, and she was sitting at table 4. Across from her, Adrian Pierce raised a glass of vintage Cabernet. To the quarterly report, Adrian said, "Profits are up 40%. The stock is at an all-time high, and the AI project launches next week." To the report. Louisa smiled, clinking her glass against his. She took a sip, savoring the taste. It tasted like victory. It had been a whirlwind 3 months. With the debt restructured on honest terms, Louisa had negotiated herself. The company had stabilized. Elena and Gavin were currently awaiting trial, their bail set at millions. The custody threat against Adrian and his children had evaporated the moment Gavin's criminal activities came to light. "I have something for you," Adrian said, reaching into his jacket. Louisa raised an eyebrow. "Another contract to review." "I'm off the clock, Adrian." "Not a contract," Adrian said. He slid a small velvet box across the table. Louisa froze. Her heart skipped a beat. "Open it," he urged. She opened the box. Inside was not a ring, but a key. An old-fashioned, heavy iron key. "What is this?" "I bought the building," Adrian said, gesturing around the restaurant. "The whole building. The Obsidian is now a tenant of Pierce and Evans Holdings." "Pierce and Evans," Louisa repeated. "I made you a partner," Adrian said. "Not just an employee, a partner." "You saved my life, Louisa. You saved my kids. I don't want to run this empire without you." Louisa looked at the key. She thought about the nights she had spent crying over medical bills. She thought about the rude customers, the aching feet, the feeling of invisibility. She looked at Henry, the manager, who was currently trembling near the wine station. He had been terrified for 3 months that Louisa would fire him. Louisa waved him over. "Yes, Miss Evans?" Henry asked, sweating. "Is the wine to your liking?" "The wine is excellent, Henry," Louisa said, "but the staff, they look tired. From now on, mandatory breaks every 2 hours and a 20% raise for the wait staff, effective immediately." Henry's eyes widened. "Yes, madame. Of course, madame." "And Henry, yes. Don't ever let anyone interrupt a guest while they are reading a contract." Adrian laughed a rich, happy sound. He reached across the table and took her hand. So he said, "What do we do now?" Louisa closed her fingers around the key. She looked at the man who had given her a chance and the man she had saved in return. "Now," Louisa said, "we order dessert and then we go pick up the kids. Sophie has a science fair project and she needs her dad's engineering skills and her godmother's legal defense for why a volcano is a necessary hazard." Adrian smiled, squeezing her hand. "Sounds like a plan." The fountain pen was back in Adrian's pocket, capped and safe. The ink on the page was dry. And the story of the waitress and the billionaire wasn't ending. It was just beginning its best chapter. We often move through life assuming the experts have our best interests at heart or that the fine print is just a formality. But as Louisa and Adrian's story proves, the devil and your destiny is often hidden in the details. One line, one overlooked sentence can cost you everything you love. It wasn't Adrian's billions that saved him. It was the sharp eyes of someone who knew what it meant to struggle, someone who knew that silence is often the most dangerous consent. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, high-stakes justice and romance, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a new story. And tell me in the comments, have you ever caught someone trying to trick you in a contract? type I read the fine print below. Thanks for watching/listening.